Hey guys, how's it going? This is the Bald Metal Nerd coming at you with a video uh, that has been a few months in the making for me at this point. Today is a critical day. It is July 6th, 2018, and that means it's election day in the U.S. Ooh. By the time will watch this, I have voted. I hope you voted as well. That's it. I guess part of what I'm trying to say here is if we had, political choices in this country that were as good as the two bands that I'm going to be talking about, we would pretty much live in a utopia. Sadly, though, our political choices are far worse than the two bands I'm going to talk about. But that's a whole other discussion. Anyway, let's have a talk about a fun vote or a fun thing to choose between. We are going to be talking about Judas Priest versus Iron Maiden, or Iron Maiden versus Judas Priest, however you want to coin this. And I am actually going to tell you which band is my favorite and why. I'm actually going to pick between the two. I'm not going to do a cop-out and say they're equally awesome, even though that's kind of what I think. Really, it's not going to... My favorite between those two bands will be based on nothing really objective, and I'll talk about why. And I'll talk about why I chose one band over the other. So, let's start breaking down Judas Priest and Iron Maiden, and we will, and then I'll tell you which one is my favorite. So, I tried to think to myself, because when I first started this journey, I honestly wasn't sure which band I leaned more towards, truthfully. What inspired this whole thing was me going to a Judas Priest concert in September and wearing an Iron Maiden t-shirt. Or I think maybe it was August, whatever. August or September, I went to a Judas Priest concert, and I had worn an Iron Maiden t-shirt because I didn't have a Judas Priest shirt at that time. So I wore a Maiden shirt to the show, and it almost seemed, as far as the metal t-shirts that I saw, which of course there were many, I saw a shitload of Metallica shirts, not unsurprisingly. And but they were not the majority of the crowd. The majority of the crowd were wearing either Judas Priest or Iron Maiden t-shirts, and I found that really interesting because it was real close to 50-50, right? Even though it was a Judas Priest concert, you saw almost the exact same number of Iron Maiden and Judas Priest t-shirts, which I thought was really interesting. And of course, people have been comparing these bands since time immemorial. This is completely unoriginal for me. I'm just treading water that lots and lots of other people have already kind of tread over. I'm just doing my own take on this. And honestly, when I started this whole thing, I wasn't sure which band I would prefer over the other. I was only listening to their entire catalogs pretty close together that I was even able to pick a favorite. That's how close these two bands were to me, because I looked at every objective measure of, or tried to pick every objective measure of which band I liked better, and I just fell up short on any objective measurement. I looked at my last FM listening history, and according to it, which it doesn't capture all my listening history, just when I remember to turn it on, and I happen to be listening from something that can broadcast the last FM. Basically, according to last FM, I've listened to Judas Priest and Iron Maiden roughly the same number of times, roughly the same amount. So I can't say that I've really listened to one more than the other. I've listened to them about the same amount. So I'm pretty familiar with both bands. They're both two of my absolute favorite bands, and in my opinion, two of the best metal bands to ever exist. So my initial personal thing, I was like, well, I can't tell. So I then started to break it down by categories. Which band do I think is more important to metal? I don't know. Because I think it's safe to say, without Judas Priest or Iron Maiden, heavy metal would not exist as it currently does. Period. They both had gigantic influence on the genre. Now, you could potentially say that maybe Judas Priest had more simply because they were earlier than Iron Maiden. Black Sabbath, obviously established heavy metal initially, but I don't think it would be unfair to say that Judas Priest came along from their first album was a disaster in my opinion, but that's neither here nor there. I'd say from their second album on, for a while, I wouldn't say it's unfair to say that they helped really establish a lot of the rules for heavy metal that every other band pretty much copied. So as far as Judas Priest's influence on metal is enormous. Same thing with Iron Maiden, though. No, they weren't as early as Judas Priest, obviously, but they have such an giant influence over the genre that if you remove Iron Maiden from the history of metal, metal would not sound the way that it does, period. I think it's safe to say that both of those bands had a gigantic influence on metal. I mean, maybe you could make the argument that Judas Priest was slightly more influential, but you're honestly kind of splitting hairs at that point, and it's really more of a technicality, I think, than any real lack of influence on Maiden's part. So I would say they were roughly equal on that front. So, right. So then I looked at, I broke it down like, the quality of, their performances, their writing, whatever. So what did I think? I'm going to break it down by instrument, right? We're going to talk about, first we'll talk about bass guitar, okay? Clearly, between Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, Iron Maiden has a better bass player. Steve Harris is a better player than Ian Hill. As much as now that's not to say Ian's a bad player. He's not. He's absolutely great. I really enjoy the bass guitar on Judas Priest albums. However, Steve Harris is definitely a cut above that. He's, probably one of the best bass players to ever exist in metal. Now, so advantage, Iron Maiden. Drums. Well, as much as I enjoy Nico's beats and all that, I'm going to have to give the nod to Judas Priest on this. They have I know Maiden's had a few drummers over the years, and so has Priest, but Priest has more what I would call whiz-bang memorable drum stuff than Maiden does. Especially, of course, the most famous is the intro of Painkiller, and there's just countless other examples, because when you listen to Priest's discography real close together and Maiden's, you notice, for lack of a better, the percussive techniques more on Priest's work. It's more defined. It drives the music forward more. It's just better. I think the drumming overall with Priest is amazing. And I think they definitely have the leg up over Maiden in the drumming department. So we've covered two things. Now, of course, we're going to talk about the all-important guitar. Who has better guitar player? Who do I think is better performance-wise? This is going to be a cop-out because I would say that on that front, they're equal. I can't say that the guitar playing is any better in either band. It's extremely good in both bands. They both have tons of great riffs, great performers, great solos. Yeah, I can't say that guitar playing is better in either band. It is absolutely phenomenal in both on guitars. Now, of course, that only leaves one thing to talk about: vocals, right? Let's talk about the non completely iconic vocalists first. So Maiden, of course, their first vocalist, at least on record, was Paul Di'Anno. And what do I think of him? I think he is an he was extremely good on those first two records, and I think he fit into them really well. And I think he, for the vibe that they had and what they were doing on those first two records, I think he fits really well into it. That being said, of course, I prefer Bruce Dickinson. How can I not? But we're not going to talk about Bruce yet. Sorry, I jumped ahead, but because I was just saying, I was listening to the demo tapes of Bruce singing those songs, and I think he does a phenomenal job on it. And of course, live when he sings, it was not song, but we're not talking about it. But anyway, sorry, jumping ahead. I love Bruce, but we'll get to that. So anyway, Paul, though, incredible on those albums and great. Is he as good as the iconic vocalist? No, he's not. But he is really good for those two records. So now, that was a one-off because Priest didn't have a vocalist, at least on record, prior to their iconic vocalist, right? Whoever was in the band before Rob, nobody cares at this point, right? So, that being said, let's talk about the replacement singers in both bands. First, we're going to talk about Blaze Bayley. I think with Blaze, they did one good album and one bad album, right? And I was watching live footage of Blaze singing with Maiden some of the classic songs. I think he did a fairly respectable job. He was pretty good with them live. Not perfect, but pretty good. And I think he did as well as he could. In fact, I think Blaze is a really good singer. He certainly has some vocal chops and talent, far more than many other metal singers I could name. But he's good, but of course he's not Bruce Dickinson. So there you go. That's my opinion of Blaze. Really good. In fact, I'd say he's far above average as a metal singer. He just didn't jibe with Maiden as well. So now, of course, we're going to talk about Tim Ripper Owens, right? In his tenure as Judas Priest vocalist. I think there was one fantastic album with Ripper and one terrible album with Ripper. So kind of a very similar record, recorded output wise, very similar results there. One good, one bad. As far as how well do I think Tim fit in with Judas Priest? I think he fit in with Judas Priest a little bit better than Blaze fit in with Iron Maiden. And the reason I say that is I think when they hired Tim, they were intentionally looking for he was hired out of a Judas Priest tribute band, right? They were obviously looking for somebody who was closer to Rob in singing style, and they got someone who's pretty close, right? Could more or less hit the same notes. Does he really sound like Rob? No, not really. No one will confuse his voice for Rob Halford's listening to the record. He doesn't sound like Rob, which is a good thing. I mean, you wouldn't want him to sound exactly the same, right? But he is extremely talented and extremely good, and again, one of the best metal vocalists that there is. But he's not Rob Halford. Let's face it, he's not Rob. So, all that being said, all of what I just said, does that push one, before we talk about Rob versus Bruce, does that put one band ahead of the other when it comes to vocals? I'm going to have to go ahead and say, no, it really doesn't. Because when you think of singers for these two bands, you don't really think about those guys unless you're talking about the oddball albums or the replacement. You only think about them in a specific context. But when you think about the band, when you think about Iron Maiden, you think of Bruce Dickinson. When you think of Judas Priest, you think of Rob Halford. It's that simple. They are the voices that are associated with those bands for good reason. I mean, you could make it, it would be extremely easy to make an argument that Rob Halford is the best metal vocalist to ever exist. You could also make the same argument that Bruce Dickinson is the best vocalist ever to exist. You could make compelling arguments either way, and I don't think you would be wrong, no matter which one of those two guys you picked to say they were the greatest vocalist ever. Easy to make that argument. Are there other vocalists I think that are as good as they are? Yes, I do. But that's really not what this is about. This is about those two specifically. And do I think Rob or Bruce is better? No. Again, I'm going to cop out. I'm going the cop out route. I don't think either Rob or Bruce is better. They both are still in top form. If you listen to, the entire catalog, they're both incredible performances on literally every album. And if you listen to them live, they are amazing. They both are still at the top of their game, even at their advanced ages. They still, can really sing incredibly well in a live setting. I haven't had the privilege of seeing Maiden live yet, but I can tell you when I saw Judas Priest live a couple of months ago, Rob sounded amazing. He sounded absolutely amazing. He on top of his game, pretty much hitting all the notes. Fantastic. Of course, I've watched, in preparation for this video, I watched some, recent live video of Iron Maiden. Same thing with Bruce. Bruce is at the top of his game. Amazing voice, amazing presence. So do I think one vocalist is better than the other? No. So there you go. So that was the objective, performances. So now we're getting into, that's all the objective stuff out of the way. So now we're going to talk about purely subjective things. So let's see what I found, if anything. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about, I recently, of course, just did the worst to first for both Maiden and Priest, right? So what did I think of these bands overall? Overall, if I averaged all of Priest albums, right, 79.83 for all of Priest albums. For all of Maiden's albums, that's an 83.31. So overall, if I go just based on the numerical rating of every single one of the albums of both of these bands, Maiden beats Priest, right? That is the bottom line. We got mathematics there. It's 79.83 for Priest, 83.31 for Maiden. So, boom, Maiden stomps Priest. Well, let's think about that. So that's if I throw in all their albums, including their stinkers, right? Including their bad albums. Now, if I only talk about the albums that I like, right? For Iron Maiden, it's 88.57. If I talk about the average of the albums I like for Judas Priest, it's 90.38. So, obviously, it flips. So, depending on, let me put it charitably, if I decide to ignore the albums I don't like, Priest would seem to be better. If I choose to listen to, if I incorporate entire discographies, Maiden is better. So, kind of a tie there. Another tie. Indirectly, that's a tie. So, what I had to do at that point, since there was no clear objective winner is I had to pick a favorite based purely on style. So at this point, I am actually going to, just bear with me here. Just got to move this thing around to make sure I can actually show this on screen. All right, now you see which band I picked as my favorite, and it is, with a subjective choice. Now back to my regular view for the remainder of this video. Okay, so now you might be asking yourself, well, why did you pick Judas Priest over Iron Maiden? And that was simply because of subjective taste, my subjective taste, right? For me, it was all down to style, right? You could argue that Iron Maiden has consistently, over their course of their career, made better albums than Judas Priest. My own personal rankings bore that out, right? But here's the thing. Here's the difference between the two. In my opinion, Judas Priest has made more better albums than Iron Maiden has, right? Judas Priest has made some worse albums than Iron Maiden, but they've also made more betterer albums than Iron Maiden. To me, this is, again, my subjective opinion. And on top of that, a lot of it has to do with the fact that Judas Priest has a more, how can I put this, in-your-face and immediate musical style than Iron Maiden does, generally. That's not always true. I mean, Iron Maiden has plenty of in-your-face songs, but overall, when you think of the visceral, in-your-face aggression, it's more, Judas Priest delivers that more than Iron Maiden does. And that's my personal preference. It's what I like. Don't get me wrong, though. Iron Maiden is amazing. Incredible. And if somebody said to me, you can only listen to one of these bands for the rest of your life, right? You have to only listen to one or the other. You can't listen to, for, I don't know what sadistic son of a bitch would ever do this, but whatever. If I had to I would have a really hard time picking between the two. Because as far as how much I like Judas Priest better than Iron Maiden, it's by about maybe a tiny amount, this much, microscopic, how much better I think Priest is than Maiden. It's really, really, really close, which is why I had such a hard time picking a favorite between the two. But as I was listening to their albums and going through this, it started to become clearer to me, because I was like, okay, I like Priest's style overall better than Maiden's. I also feel that Priest has evolved more over the years than Maiden has. They've changed more. They've gotten far heavier than Maiden has. Like, they started out basically as a what's the word I'm looking for? A classic rock band. Then they became one of the pillars of metal, right? And they just got heavier and heavier over the years. Now, with their, from Painkiller on, they easily are as heavy as most other metal bands. Like, their heaviness is really high. They're a very heavy band, more so than Maiden. That's not to say that Maiden isn't incredible and amazing. I just feel that Priest suits me better than Maiden does. But anyway, that's it. I think I've gone on long enough praising both of these bands effusively, but for me, Priest just has the slight edge. So, in the spirit of today, vote below. Which one do you like better, and why, and by how much? Do you think one band is way better than the other, or do you think they're really close? Or, hell, if you want to cop out and say they're equal, that's fine too. Anyway, that's it. Thank you so much for watching this, and so much for listening to me just talk about this and indulging me in this. Anyway, as always, if you like this, thumbs up. If you hate me, thumbs down. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'll see you guys next time.